Welcome back to the podcast.
We have a great show for you today.
Welcome to the debate. So picture a busy city intersection at maybe 8 o'clock in the morning.
Right. If you stand on the corner and just watch the thousands of people hurrying past, you'll notice that nearly every single one of them is clutching a warm cardboard or ceramic cup. And they hold these cups defensively, almost like protective talismans against the demands of the day.
Yeah, it's a very striking image.
It really is. Today we are exploring this pervasive, near-universal human attachment to coffee. We're looking at a framework that posits coffee has essentially become an emotional support system of modern life. And I argue that our devotion to this dark liquid is fundamentally rooted in its profound psychological benefits. Specifically, the rituals, the comfort, and the nostalgic sanctuaries it provides in an increasingly chaotic world.
Right, and I come at it from a completely different angle. While imagery of a protective talisman is, highly poetic, I argue that this heavily romanticized view of coffee culture is largely a psychological coping mechanism.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's an elaborate narrative we construct to mask what is fundamentally a physiological dependence and really a strict chemical relief cycle.
Well, I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective on how we actually interact with this beverage. It operates as a vital psychological tool. I mean, it is a lifestyle, one that comes with its own deeply personal parameters. Think about it. It's the specific mug you just have to use, the exact corner of the kitchen you stand in, the sacred silence before the day begins. This process is essentially nervous system care.
Nervous system care.
Exactly. In rushed or messy lives, humans require an anchor. The sensory experience of coffee, the radiant warmth in your hands, the familiar, rich aroma. It provides a deeply comforting, almost childlike sense of protection. And this feeling of safety, this deliberate physical pause, stands completely apart from the actual chemical ingestion of caffeine.
Okay.
It is the ritual of the pause that we are attached to, not just the chemical.
That is a beautifully constructed argument, but have you considered that the comfort being described here is, well, in strict clinical terms, essentially the relief of avoiding withdrawal?
Withdrawal is a pretty strong word for a morning routine.
But an accurate one. Anyone listening who has ever tried to skip their morning cup knows exactly what this feels like. We aren't just talking about being a little sleepy.
Sure.
We are talking about genuine physical symptoms of dependence. The heavy, behind-the-eyes headaches, the profound sense of melancholy, the acute irritability.
Well, people do get grumpy, yes.
There is a very real phenomenon where, without that morning coffee, the lights literally feel too bright, and the people around you seem entirely too cheerful, to the point where their cheerfulness actually feels offensive.
I mean, that's certainly true for some.
Right, so the elaborate rituals you're talking about, the specific mug, the exact corner of the kitchen, they're simply behavioral adaptations. We construct these beautiful routines to ensure with absolute reliability that we receive the necessary chemical pick-me-up required to function in society. The comfort you're describing is just the absence of the drug's absence.
Okay, let's drill down into that morning routine then, because I think it's the perfect place to test our competing theories. Let's look at the physical process, right? Boiling the water, hearing the hum of the machine, smelling the grounds, pouring it into that favorite mug. This sequence is profoundly soothing. It settles the system down before the day even really begins. I look at this morning routine as being akin to an airlock on a spaceship.
Wait, an airlock?
Yes, exactly. Think about what an airlock does. It is a necessary, pressurized transition zone between two radically different environments.
Okay, I follow.
Your morning coffee routine is the transition zone between the private, vulnerable peace of sleep and the harsh public demands of the waking world. You need that space to pressurize your soul, so to speak, before you step out into the void. And here is my direct pushback to your chemical dependence theory.
Let's hear it.
If our attachment is purely chemical, how do you explain the mood shift that happens before the first sip is even taken? The psychological relief arrives the moment the water starts boiling, well before the drug actually enters the bloodstream.
Well, I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that the pre-sip relief is purely psychological in the way you're framing it. Let me tell you why, and it really comes down to basic neuroscience.
Okay.
If we analyze the pre-coffee human condition, we are looking at an organism that is physically present but whose mind is still buffering. They are caught somewhere between the bed and the kitchen, mentally unavailable.
Right, still waking up.
Exactly. So the calm they feel during the preparation process, boiling the water, smelling the grounds, is classic anticipatory dopamine.
Oh, so you're saying the ritual is just a trigger.
Precisely. It is a well-documented neurological response. The brain recognizes the sensory cues of the ritual, the sound of the grinder, the smell of the roast, and it knows that the caffeine is coming to clear the mental fog.
I see.
So, it releases dopamine in anticipation of the reward. Furthermore, look at what happens when people try to cut back on this supposedly peaceful ritual. They don't just miss a spiritual quiet moment, they become incredibly dramatic.
They do.
They end up literally pleading with their coffee makers to brew faster. You don't beg an airlock to pressurize unless you are suffocating. They are pleading for a chemical intervention, not a psychological pause.
That's an interesting point, though. I would frame it differently. Even if there is an anticipatory dopamine mechanism at play, you cannot entirely discount the genuine emotional regulation that the ritual provides. The act of making coffee tells the body you can relax for a second. In a modern society where we are instantly bombarded by emails, news alerts, and obligations the exact second we open our eyes and look at our phones, having a dedicated 10-minute task is invaluable.
It is nice, sure.
It requires just enough focus to keep you present. You have to measure the water, watch the heat, but not enough focus to cause stress. The pleading with the coffee maker isn't just about the caffeine. It's about the threat of losing that one guaranteed moment of predictability in the day.
Right.
The interruption of the routine is what causes the distress because you are losing that familiar mood.
But the predictability of the routine is entirely predicated on the predictability of the chemical response. Let's run a quick thought experiment.
Sure.
If I sneaked into your kitchen and replaced your carefully selected single-origin caffeinated beans with decaf without telling you, the physical ritual would remain completely identical.
Okay.
You would boil the water, use the favorite mug, stand in the sacred corner. But the end result, the clearing of that buffering mind, would fail. Within an hour you would have a headache, and very quickly, that ritual would lose its comfort and power. The routine only matters because it is a reliable delivery mechanism for the stimulant.
Well, I completely disagree that the ritual would lose its power. But let's expand the scope here a bit. If this were just about the chemical relief of that morning airlock, as you call it, we'd all just drink instant coffee in our kitchens, right?
Some people do.
Or pop a caffeine pill and head straight to the office. But we don't. We seek out crowds to do it. Let's talk about cafe culture. If coffee were merely a chemical delivery system, a clinical dispensary would suffice. Yet we have built an entire global infrastructure of cafes. I look at these spaces as tiny, safe worlds tucked inside noisy days.
Well, they are certainly aesthetically pleasing, I will grant you that.
It's more than aesthetics. A good cafe offers low music, clinking cups, people speaking softly. It creates an environment where a person is allowed to feel alone, but not isolated. People go to these places to reflect deeply. Sometimes they just sit by a window and stare outside for 30 minutes, doing absolutely nothing. The fact that we actively seek out this specific, curated atmosphere proves that the coffee experience completely transcends the drink itself. It is about a social sanctuary.
I acknowledge the atmospheric appeal, but fundamentally, the cafe is an architectural monument to the drug.
An architectural monument? I mean, that's quite a cynical view, isn't it?
It's a pragmatic one. It is a socially sanctioned space designed specifically to facilitate a habit. Look at the ambitious dreams people bring to these coffee shops.
What do you mean?
They walk in with their laptops, expecting to organize their entire lives, answer mountains of emails, write a novel, and engage in deep reflection. But what actually happens?
They get distracted.
Exactly. Most of the time, those ambitions dissolve. They drink half the coffee, look out the window for 30 minutes, scroll on their phone, and leave deciding they've had a meaningful day.
When a cafe truly hits the spot, it's because it successfully removes all social and professional demands while allowing the user to safely nurse their physical dependence. It dresses up a physiological need in the guise of a sophisticated, intellectual experience.
But wait, isn't that dissolution of ambition exactly the psychological value I'm talking about?
How so?
That is the point. Sometimes coffee isn't about productivity at all. It's about how a moment feels. Society demands endless, relentless productivity from us.
True.
The cafe is one of the very few places left in the modern world where you are allowed to be quiet, tired, thoughtful, or a little lost, and nobody asks you to explain it. You are granted permission to stop. The purchase of the coffee is just the rent you pay for the seat in that sanctuary. Yes, the drink matters, but the feeling around it, the ambient noise, the rain outside the window seat, that matters far more. It is a refuge.
A refuge that requires a stimulant to enjoy. It is fascinating to me that this so-called refuge always centers around a substance that artificially elevates your heart rate and alters your brain chemistry.
Well,
Why is it that sitting on a park bench doesn't provide the exact same feeling of being alone but not isolated?
a park bench doesn't offer the same sensory warmth or the ambient hum of a community.
I would argue it's because the park bench doesn't come with a mandated dose of a psychoactive substance. Think about what happens in cafes. People sit there having a total life crisis next to a pastry.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Right, the cafe provides a space where one can experience the very real symptoms of modern burnout while simultaneously ingesting the specific chemical designed to temporarily mask that burnout. It is highly functional. We call it a sanctuary, because admitting it as a beautifully decorated habit facilitator feels far less romantic.
Okay, I'm not convinced by that purely utilitarian line of reasoning because it completely ignores the profound weight of human sentimentality. We are not just biological machines processing chemicals. Let's look at the role of nostalgia and memory.
Okay.
A single smell of coffee can trigger incredibly vivid, nostalgic memories. It can instantly transport you to childhood mornings. You know, hearing your parents talking quietly in the kitchen. It can remind you of late night studying in college or the nervous energy of your first office job. These are deep emotional anchors. When someone is having a truly hard day and they turn to a cup of coffee, it acts as a way to make the day feel a little less sharp. It acts as a softener.
I hear you, but
So how can you dismiss a ritual that carries so much memory and genuine emotional connection as merely a biological imperative?
because memory and emotion naturally wrap themselves around survival mechanisms and physiological rewards. It is evolutionary biology.
Okay, sure, but
We feel immense emotional comfort around the smell of cooking food or the feeling of a warm fire. And yes, we feel comfort around the ingestion of a stimulant that clears brain fog. Let's actually talk about what caffeine is doing in the brain to provide that softening effect. It's a fascinating mechanism.
go ahead.
Throughout your waking day, your brain naturally produces a neurotransmitter called adenosine. It's essentially a chemical tracker for fatigue.
Right.
The longer you're awake, the more adenosine binds to receptors in your brain, slowing down nerve cell activity and making you feel heavy, emotionally tired, and overwhelmed. Now, caffeine has a nearly identical molecular structure to adenosine.
Oh, really?
Yes, when you drink that coffee, it takes about 20 minutes to absorb into the bloodstream and cross the blood-brain barrier. When it does, the caffeine rushes in and plugs up those receptors. It doesn't actually give you energy. It just blindfolds your brain so it can't feel its own exhaustion.
Okay, so it blocks it.
You are chemically blocking the sensation of fatigue. So the left that makes an overwhelmed person suddenly able to answer a simple email or stop being annoyed at everyone isn't the magic of nostalgia. It is the sudden, artificial, chemically induced clearing of adenosine. We romanticize it as an emotional softener to avoid confronting our heavy reliance on a daily stimulant just to cope with our lives.
But the emotion is still wrapped around it? Even if the origin of the feeling is physiological, the psychological reality of the memory is completely genuine to the person experiencing it.
I'm not saying the memory is fake.
Right, it is memory with emotion still attached to it. It still means something profound inside you. When life feels incredibly loud and demanding, and you take that first sip, and for one tiny second everything settles down, that isn't just adenosine receptors being blocked. That is a human being intentionally reconnecting with a lineage of safe, comforting mornings. It's the continuity of your own identity. It's the realization that the best things in life aren't always big solutions to our problems. Sometimes they are just small softeners that give us the strength to keep going.
I agree that the subjective experience of the memory is incredibly real to the person feeling it. I'm not denying the reality of the emotion, but we must distinguish between the cause and the effect.
Okay.
Coffee is ultimately a pick-me-up. It lifts you just enough to finish the task at hand. If you are relying on a continuous string of these chemical lifts to navigate your daily existence, the nostalgic memories of your parents in the kitchen are a convenient, comforting narrative that your brain supplies to justify the continuation of the cycle.
So you think the brain is tricking us into romanticizing it?
Absolutely. It is much easier and far more pleasant to say to yourself, I am partaking in a rich, distinctly human ritual, than to admit my blood vessels will dilate and cause a pounding headache, and my brain will experience a weird, heavy sadness if I don't drink this.
That's a little bleak.
But true. The sheer drama that unfolds when people try to quit talking as if every sentence takes their last bit of strength, the lethargy, the mood swings, it proves that the biological imperative is the solid foundation of the house, and the nostalgia is just the pretty wallpaper we put up to make it look nice.
Well, as we draw this debate to a close, I want to summarize where I stand based on the different lenses we've applied here today.
Sure.
I firmly maintain my view that coffee represents a beautiful, remarkably ordinary routine that carries profound emotional weight. The way we engage with it, the deliberate nervous system care of the morning routine, the carefully constructed architectural sanctuaries of our cafes, where we can be alone without isolation, the deep nostalgic triggers of childhood memory, all of this points to coffee functioning as a crucial psychological pause in modern life. It is an emotional support system that provides much-needed comfort, familiar rhythms, and a softening of our sharpest, most difficult days.
And to summarize my perspective, while I easily concede that the routines and environments we've built around coffee are undeniably pleasant, aesthetically rich, and culturally significant, they ultimately serve to dress up a strict physiological dependence.
Right.
We cannot ignore the mechanics of withdrawal, the headaches, the irritability at bright lights, the heavy mental buffering caused by adenosine buildup. The anticipatory dopamine of the morning airlock routine, the functional escapism of the cafe, and the romanticization of the stimulants lift are all intricate, highly evolved behavioral mechanisms. They are designed by our brains to ensure we consistently feed a chemical habit that allows us to function under the pressures of the modern world.
Well, I will say, despite our vastly different frameworks, there is a clear point of convergence in our interpretations. Regardless of whether we view it through the lens of a vital psychological sanctuary or a strict physiological dependence, we both agree that coffee plays a remarkably disproportionate role in regulating human behavior, mood, and social structuring.
Yes.
It is a tiny, everyday thing that has fundamentally shaped how we navigate the waking world.
Absolutely. I entirely agree. The sheer scale of its influence on our daily functioning is staggering, from dictating the exact moment we feel capable of answering a stressful email to providing the literal architectural blueprint for our public gathering spaces across the globe. It is an incredibly powerful force, however you choose to categorize its underlying mechanisms.
Which leaves us with a lingering thought for everyone listening. The next time you find yourself holding that warm mug, take a moment to examine your own routines. Think about the mechanics and the memories. There is so much more to explore in the sociology of our daily habits, and it is up to you to decide whether your daily cup is a meaningful emotional sanctuary or a masterclass in human rationalization.
Well said.
When you step out into that busy city intersection tomorrow morning, clutching that familiar talisman, ask yourself, are you stepping through an airlock into the day, or are you simply avoiding the bright lights?